My name is Linda Parker. I am 67 years old, and for most of my life, I worked as a nurse in Savannah, Georgia. I spent decades running on black coffee and night shifts, patching up strangers in hospital corridors, believing that as long as my son had a roof over his head and food on the table, the rest didn't matter. I thought I had seen every kind of pain during those long years at the hospital, the accidents, the betrayals, the losses families carried through my doors. But nothing prepared me for the kind of hurt that arrived in my own home. It's strange how quickly life can twist. One moment you're fixing a small problem, something ordinary, and the next you're staring at a truth that rips the air from your lungs. It all started with a repair. For weeks, my security cameras had been broken, and though I tried to tell myself it was fine, I carried a small unease inside me. Eventually, I called a technician. He fixed the system and installed an app on my phone. I thought it was just another chore checked off my list. I didn't realize that this tiny piece of technology was about to uncover a secret that would shake the ground beneath me. The very next morning, I sat with a cup of tea in my kitchen. Out of simple curiosity, I tapped the app. I expected to see an empty living room, maybe the soft glow of morning light on my old armchair. Instead, I saw movement. I leaned closer, and my heart dropped. There, in the quiet of my own home, my son James and his wife Melissa were not gone for errands like they had said. They were in my living room, spreading my private documents across the coffee table, as though my life was nothing more than a file to be rearranged. In that moment, I froze. The kind of freeze where your body is still, but your mind races through memories, questions, and the slow dawning of betrayal. And that was only the beginning. When I think back on my life, it feels like a long line of nights stitched together by fluorescent hospital lights and the sound of monitors beeping. I was only 35 when my husband walked out. My son James was just 6 years old, small enough that he still clung to my hand when we crossed the street, but old enough to understand that his father wasn't coming back. I didn't have the luxury of breaking down. I had bills, a mortgage, and a little boy who needed stability more than anything else. So, I threw myself into work. I picked up double shifts whenever I could, sometimes working overnight and then returning the next morning without more than a quick shower and a cup of black coffee to keep me going. The nurses used to joke that I lived at the hospital. Maybe in a way I did, but every sacrifice had a purpose. I told myself that as long as James had a warm bed, food in his stomach, and the sense that he was loved, then I could endure anything. Our house was modest, 2 bedrooms, creaky floors, a kitchen that always smelled faintly of coffee, no matter the hour. But it was ours. I can still remember kneeling on that kitchen floor, pressing Band-Aids over James's scraped knees after he'd played too hard in the yard. I remember staying up late helping him glue together school projects, the two of us laughing when the glitter spilled everywhere. Every birthday. I brought home a store-bought cake because I couldn't afford a bakery one. But James always grinned like it was the best cake in the world. He used to hug me so tight and whisper that I was his hero. And for a long time, I believed him. I turned down chances to remarry. Men came and went, kind enough sometimes, but my heart was always focused on raising James. I wanted him to know what it felt like to have one parent who never wavered. I thought that if I gave him stability, he would grow into a man who valued honesty and loyalty. When he eventually married Melissa, I tried to welcome her as a daughter. She was polite and charming in the beginning, quick with compliments, and I let myself believe she wanted to build a family alongside us. So when James and Melissa asked if they could move in with me a couple years ago, I said yes without hesitation. I was retired by then, my body slowing down after years of 12-hour shifts. The idea of having them close felt comforting. I thought it was love that brought them home to me, that they wanted to make sure I wasn't alone. I had no idea that what felt like closeness would slowly turn into control. That the warmth I thought I was welcoming into my house would one day cast such a cold shadow. And the proof of that came the morning I opened that camera app and saw what they were really after. The morning after the technician fixed my security system, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea. It was around 9 in the morning, the kind of quiet moment I usually cherished, sunlight slipping through the blinds, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. Out of nothing more than curiosity, I reached for my phone and tapped the little icon for the camera app. I expected to see an empty living room, maybe the stillness of my armchair, the neat stack of papers on the side table. Instead, the screen filled with movement. At first, I thought maybe I had accidentally opened an old recording. But no, it was live. My son James was pacing in front of the coffee table. Melissa was sitting calmly on the couch, and spread across the table were my private documents, my deed, my pension papers, folders I had kept carefully organized for decades. My first reaction was disbelief. I wanted to believe it was some kind of mistake, that maybe they were looking for a utility bill or something minor. But then I watched more closely. Melissa's movements weren't casual. She flipped through my files with the precision of someone hunting for something specific. James's face carried the same tension I had seen on patients waiting for bad news. And then it struck me the way they moved, the way they whispered to each other. It wasn't curiosity, it was intent. They were searching for the original deed to my home. They weren't just snooping. They were planning something far darker. My chest tightened. I felt my pulse race as though I had just sprinted down a hallway, but my body remained frozen in my chair. The betrayal was so sharp, it almost didn't feel real. This was my son, the same boy I had raised alone, the child I had worked endless shifts for, the young man I thought would stand by me in my later years. And here he was, treating my life's work, my home, as nothing more than a prize to claim. In that moment, the world around me seemed to grow smaller, quieter, except for the pounding of my own heartbeat. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I simply watched as the people I trusted most revealed themselves, and I knew this was only the beginning of something I wasn't prepared for. As I sat staring at that small, glowing screen, something inside me cracked. The shock was heavy enough on its own, but what followed was worse. I could hear Melissa's sharp, impatient tone as she pushed James to search harder. She wasn't just browsing through my life, she was strategizing. And James, my only son, the boy who once hugged me so tightly and called me his hero, was agreeing with her. They talked about my habits, how I always kept things neatly filed, how nothing was ever thrown away. What had once been my strength, the discipline that carried me through endless shifts and long years of loneliness, was now being treated like a weakness to exploit. I had built my life on order, on sacrifice, and now that very discipline was being turned against me. What cut me deepest was the way they spoke about money. I had been giving them $700 each month out of my pension. To me, it was a way of easing their stress, helping them breathe a little easier. I thought of it as peace money, a way to keep harmony in the house. But to them, it was crumbs. They laughed at my generosity, belittled it, dismissed it as though it meant nothing. And then came the words that made me feel as if the air had been sucked from the room. Melissa talked about selling my home, about putting me in a small, one-bedroom apartment for what she called my last years. My last years spoken as if I were already gone, as if I were nothing more than a burden to be managed until the end. James chimed in, suggesting that if I refused to sign, they could trick me. They believed I was confused enough to mistake legal documents for insurance forms. Hearing that broke something in me. I am older? Yes. And sometimes I misplace my glasses or forget the date. But confusion is not incompetence. They were weaponizing my age, building a false story that I was incapable of managing my own life. I sat there frozen, tea cooling in my hands, realizing that my greatest fear had come true. The people I had trusted most, the family I had poured my soul into, were plotting to erase me from my own home. For a long time, I simply grieved, but slowly, something else began to rise. It wasn't rage, not yet. It was a quiet, simmering resolve. I understood, in that moment, that if they wanted a war, they had just declared it, and I would not be the one to surrender. Not long after I uncovered their plan, the atmosphere in the house began to shift in ways that made my stomach turn. James and Melissa grew strangely attentive, but not in a way that felt loving. Their questions came laced with condescension, their tone carrying a false sweetness that I couldn't mistake for anything other than strategy. I began to overhear conversations I wasn't meant to hear. James called our longtime family doctor, speaking in that careful, calculated way people use when they're trying to plant seeds of doubt. He told her he was worried about me, that I was paranoid, that I had even gone so far as to install cameras around the house to spy on them. I remember standing in the hallway, listening, my chest tightening as I realized what he was doing. He was building a case against me, trying to rewrite the truth so that when the time came, I would look unstable and they would look like the devoted caregivers. Melissa played her part perfectly too. She started saying things loud enough for me to catch comments about how I repeated questions, how I forgot dates, how I talked to myself in empty rooms. Each remark was a brick in the wall they were constructing around me, a wall designed to shut me out of my own life. It was cruel in a way that cut deeper than their plan to steal my home. They weren't just after my property. They were trying to strip me of my credibility, my dignity, my voice. And the worst part was knowing how believable their story could sound. Who would people trust, the aging woman accused of paranoia, or the young couple claiming concern? But I refused to let their lies define me. Quietly, I reached out to the doctor myself. I explained what was happening, that my own son and his wife were trying to paint me as incompetent. The doctor listened carefully, then invited me to come in for a full evaluation. I agreed without hesitation. The tests were thorough memory, reasoning, problem-solving. When it was over, the doctor smiled gently and told me what I already knew. My mind was sharp, clear, and steady. She documented everything formally, ensuring I had proof if anyone questioned me. Walking out of that office, I felt lighter. They had tried to break me down, to make me question my own mind. But instead, I walked away with evidence. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. With the doctor's report in hand, I finally felt steady again. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was planning. If James and Melissa wanted to treat me as fragile and confused, then I would use that assumption to my advantage. It was the doctor who first suggested I speak to someone more experienced with cases like mine. She connected me with a private investigator named Richard Lawson. He was calm, professional, and had the kind of steady presence that made me believe he had seen every kind of betrayal before. He called what I was going through by its true name, financial elder abuse. Hearing those words made my stomach twist, but it also gave me clarity. It wasn't just family problems. It was exploitation, and it needed to be stopped. Richard wasted no time. Within a day, he returned with a technician, and together, they installed 2 small hidden cameras in my home, one in the living room, one in the dining room. They were invisible, even to me once they were in place. He also gave me a tiny microphone, no bigger than a button, that could be clipped discreetly under my blouse. His instructions were simple: keep living as though nothing had changed. Let them talk. Let them reveal themselves. So that's exactly what I did. I played my role as the aging, trusting mother. I let Melissa help me with grocery shopping, watching the impatience flash across her face when I pretended to fumble with my list. I let James explain bills to me slowly, nodding as if his oversimplified words were lessons I needed. Every sigh, every glance they shared behind my back, became fuel for my resolve. The real test came when I told them I was finally ready to review the documents they had been pressing me to sign. I acted hesitant but compliant, setting the stage exactly the way Richard had advised. Their eyes lit up with excitement. Melissa hurried to gather the papers, smoothing them on the dining table with the confidence of someone who believed victory was close. James tried to play the role of the supportive son, but his restless hands betrayed him. I adjusted my blouse as I sat down, pressing lightly to ensure the microphone was secure. Inside, my heart pounded, but outwardly I was calm. They thought they had me exactly where they wanted me, confused, pliable, ready to surrender. What they didn't know was that every word, every cruel plan, was being recorded. For the first time in this nightmare, I wasn't just defending myself, I was setting the trap. The morning of the confrontation, the house felt unnaturally still. Sunlight poured through the dining room window, but to me, it felt like the calm before a storm. James spread the papers across the table with a forced steadiness, while Melissa placed a pen beside them as if she were laying down the final piece of their plan. I leaned forward, pretending to squint at the small print. My voice carried the tone of an older woman, unsure, hesitant. But inside, I was steady as stone. I asked about clauses I already understood, and I watched them twist their explanations into manipulations. They tried to convince me it was all for my protection, all for my own good. But beneath their polished smiles, I could see the hunger. When Melissa finally let the truth slip that once the house was in their names, they would sell it and move me into a small apartment, something inside me shifted. I looked at my son, my own flesh and blood, and I saw no trace of the boy who once called me his hero. I saw only a man consumed by greed. I set the pen down, calm, deliberate. I told them in my own way that I would not sign away my life, that I was not foolish enough to surrender everything I had worked for. Confusion flickered across their faces, and before they could recover, the front door opened. Richard entered first, followed by 2 officers and my attorney. In that moment, the trap was sprung. James froze. Melissa's face hardened with rage, but it was too late. Every word, every cruel intention, had been recorded. They were arrested right there in the home they had tried to steal. For the first time in months, I felt safe. In the months that followed, the legal process played out. James and Melissa gave up any claim to my property and accepted a reduced sentence in exchange for staying away from me permanently. Neighbors asked if I regretted it, if it was too harsh. My answer was always the same. I did not regret being a mother, but I regretted not seeing sooner that motherhood does not mean allowing yourself to be destroyed. These days, I live quietly in my home. I tend my garden, share meals with neighbors who have become like family, and find joy in small things no one can steal. I learned that blood does not define family respect, honesty, and genuine love do. If my story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video. Share it with someone who may need courage today, and let me know in the comments where you are listening from.